And he wasn't kidding. Look at that. Back in October 2021, the official forecast for UK GDP growth, that's all economic activity across the economy in a year, was a 6% expansion, very chunky. That has now been reduced today to just a 3.8% growth forecast for this year. If there's less growth, there's less tax revenue, and there's more government spending on benefits and so on. So that really boxes the Chancellor in. But the really eye-catching forecast change was in inflation, which we can see on the next slide. Inflation back in 2021, in the time of Rishi Sunak's last budget, was forecast to be 4% during 2022. Pretty high by recent standards. It's now forecast to be 7.4% during this year, which is a 40-year high. Again, inflation makes it much more difficult for the Chancellor. He does get a bit more tax revenue, but you expect investment and growth to be slower. And of course, inflation represents this cost of living crisis that we're all facing. Now, if we look at the next slide, here's another eye-catching figure. In 2022-23, that's the fiscal year starting next month in April, the Chancellor said that we are going to spend, as a country, £83 billion the government will spend in debt interest. That's a huge amount of money. It's 4 times up on the year before, partly because we're borrowing a little bit more, but mainly because interest rates are going up and those debt payments are often linked to the rate of inflation. So we are now going to be spending on debt interest more than we spend on education in this country, more than we spend on defence. And the Chancellor wielded that figure, in my view, near the top of his speech to say borrowing isn't costless. Government spending means you have to borrow and pay interest, which wouldn't then go to schools, hospitals and other public services that we all want to see. Let's have a look at the next slide. And this is about the national insurance contribution increase. This was already legislated for, though the Chancellor was under a lot of pressure to reverse this policy. He didn't. He refused. He stood his ground. This is a 1.25 percentage point increase in the national insurance contributions for both employers and employees. That's firms and workers. For ordinary workers, that's going to cost lower rate taxpayers £178 a year on average, and higher rate taxpayers £715 a year on average. This is the tax rise that a lot of Tory backbenchers and indeed the Labour frontbench didn't want to see. But Sunak went through with it. So what else did he do to offset that? Well, that's shown on the next slide, because he also aligned the thresholds. What does that mean? You pay income tax and then you pay national insurance on top. And what he did is he increased the national insurance threshold by £3,000. So you pay no national insurance contribution up to the first £12,570 that you earn in a year. That's the same as the basic rate of income tax threshold as well. So that acts as a tax cut, because you can earn more without paying national insurance on it. And that's £6 billion in lower taxes. In total, the Chancellor said, a tax cut that will help 30 million people, which is a huge chunk of the workforce. Also, the Chancellor made another tax cut, but this is one which may or may not come in. He says it will, but he doesn't really know. Rishi Sunak said he's going to cut the basic rate of income tax from 20 to 19 pence, but he's not going to do that until 2023-2024, which so happens to be an election year. Will it happen? We don't know. He says it's costed on the Office for Budget Responsibility's current forecasts. They say it could happen within the numbers, the parameters that he set. But of course, with so much uncertainty, he simply cannot, in my view, credibly say that that tax cut will happen. There was one other thing that the Chancellor did, which I thought was interesting and will certainly be on the front of a lot of newspapers tomorrow. He cut the fuel duty on petrol and diesel by 5 pence per litre, and that cut starts at 6 p.m. tonight. It lasts for a year until March 2023. It sounds good, but if you've got a 55-litre car, that's a standard saloon, that's only going to save you £3.30 every time you fill up. So a headline-grabbing saving, but not a huge saving. And the next slide, something else, solar heat pumps and insulation. When we were in the European Union, these the spending on these things was had VAT on it. Rishi Sunak's now removed that VAT, making them so-called zero-rated for 5 years. This is something the Chancellor was at pains to add, and he did vote to leave the European Union. We can only do after Brexit. So that was a kind of Brexit dividend, and as soon as he said that, you could hear lots of cheering from certain parts of the Tory backbenches. But guess what? That brings into play the Northern Ireland Protocol. Because Northern Ireland is still effectively in the EU single market, that zero rating on VAT doesn't apply in Northern Ireland, at least for now. So that was the spring budget, the spring statement. It didn't have anything in terms of extra help for households with those fuel bills, even though we've had the Russia-Ukraine crisis since the Chancellor unveiled his package. It didn't have anything in terms of uprating benefits. They're only going to go up by 3.1%, which is the rate of inflation last September. But it did, the Chancellor said, deliver the biggest cut in net personal taxation for a quarter of a century, if that cut in the basic rate of income tax does indeed happen in 2023. Gloria?